Hello, this is another one of my videos on Alistair Parker's introduction to the Second World War, this one dealing with strategic bombing. This is the reference to Parker's book, and this is from chapter 10, which is quite a long chapter, which is why I've subdivided it into these separate videos. At the end of the last video I mentioned the bombing of Dresden, which occurred in mid-February 1945 and was particularly deadly even by the standards up to that point, and may have killed up to 25,000 people. The raid on Dresden caused considerable moral unease amongst British and American civilians, many of whom could see that the end of the war was approaching. Most of those who had been killed were civilians rather than trained soldiers. As such, they could be seen as defenseless and innocent, and certainly included those who were not capable of working or fighting. Some also objected to the destruction of the beautiful buildings for which Dresden was famed as a historical centre. Those involved in the bombing, as well as the wider populations in whose names the actions were carried out, needed justifications, unlike those for conventional armed combats. Since World War II, the city of Dresden has been magnificently restored, and here we have a photograph, modern photograph, of the riverfront. Churchill himself had previously addressed the issue in a speech on the 30th of June 1943, when he'd made a biblical reference comparing the Anglo-American bombers to the avenging angels of Jehovah. The German people were now reaping the whirlwind begun by the frightful cruelties and tyrannies inflicted by German armies and Nazi officials across Europe. This was the sword of justice. Basically, the Germans had started bombing civilians, so bombing German civilians in their turn was thus legitimate. Moreover, the Germans deserved punishment. Such arguments have less appeal today, but at the time it was easy to believe that those who belonged to a nation that committed immoral actions were themselves immoral. A more convincing argument was that such bombing helped to end the war more quickly. That is, the horrors of war could perhaps be morally justified if they were outweighed by the good they brought. From this standpoint, bombing military objectives, including factories making military supplies and the means of transporting them for use, such as canals, railways, bridges, tunnels, could be legitimately defended, even if it included the incidental killing of civilians as a concomitant to the actual targets. Thus, bombing by the American Air Force aroused far less controversy than that by the British, who were deliberately targeting residential areas in order to kill or frighten civilian workers, albeit that in reality the distinction between the consequences of precise and strategic bombing were not clear-cut. Over half of the American bombs were dropped blind through cloud cover or haze, and the American bomb aiming was less accurate than that of the British. Criticisms of area bombing were voiced in both houses of the British Parliament, including by the Bishop of Chichester in the House of Lords, and the MP Austin Hopkinson, an independent, in the Commons, who argued that just because one's enemy was a brute didn't justify acting like a brute oneself. The government initially dissembled. Archie Sinclair, then Secretary of State for Air, and later a major opponent of area bombing, replied in March 1943 that Bomber Command's targets were always military, and that at night time this necessarily involved bombing the areas in which they were located. Speaking in February 1944, Churchill was more direct. Area bombing was intended as a means of shortening the war, and therefore was necessary until any industrial war production in any German town or city was made impossible. Those German civilians and non-combatants who lived in such areas should leave their homes and take refuge in the countryside. Following the massive public reaction to the bombing of Dresden, Churchill changed his mind, and on the 28th of March expressed his doubts, condemning mere acts of terror and wanton destruction, however impressive. Bomber Chief Arthur Harris remained unconvinced, finding that the elimination of German industrial cities would lead to the progressive destruction and dislocation of the German military, industrial, and economic systems. Subsequent analysts have not vindicated him, however, and whilst the American Strategic Bombing Survey found that area bombing had led to a significant reduction in German productive capacity, the impact was mostly only short-term. The cities had mostly recovered 80% of their capacity within 3 months. Moreover, through concentrating resources, carefully allocating priorities, and dispersing factories, the Germans had actually increased their overall war production in 1943 and 1944. Only in the industrial area of the Ruhr had area bombing been clearly successful, and even here it had been combined with precision attacks on rail and water transport links. An 80% reduction in steel production in the zone had been achieved, but this had had limited impact, as the Germans were still able to use the ample stocks they had already accumulated. Precision bombing had played the key role in reducing German production of synthetic oil, which fell from 316,000 tons per month in early 1944 to only 17,000 tons by September. Vital production of aviation fuel from synthetic production fell from 175,000 tons in April to a mere 5,000 tons in September 1944. This success had been achieved by repeated attacks on well-defended sites, such that by the end of 1944 stocks were practically exhausted and only a limited German recovery was ever achieved. The destruction of synthetic oil plants also threatened the production of nitrates, a byproduct, and so of fertilizers, explosives, and synthetic rubber. Although strategic bombing weakened the German economy, precise bombing by highly trained crews aimed at specific targets would have had a greater impact. Precision bombing also led to a significant and measurable degradation of the German railway system, with a decline in freight car loadings from 900,000 in the week ending the 19th of August 1944 to 214,000 a little over 6 months later. Waterway traffic had also been seriously impeded, and cuts in civilian transport also significantly delayed industrial production, having a general impact on all industries after December 1944. Harris had thought that it aided the invasion effort, but the reverse is probably true. Strategic bombing was facilitated by the successful invasion of France. So thank you for listening, and particular thanks to my patrons for their kind support and encouragement. Without them I wouldn't be able to make these videos. If you want to, you're very welcome to support my channel. Do please like, comment, and share on the videos. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos, and I'll give Patreon and PayPal links below if you want to provide practical support. Next week we'll continue with this chapter on strategic bombing. Have a good day.